Okay, good morning. Yeah, my name is Doug Bish, and there's a nice little cushy place to stand up here. I'm the manager of the traffic unit, which is part of Traffic Roadway, and we're in the headquarters in the TLC building. And I saw the nice little introduction that Galen was doing on operations and everything, and we have a big hand in what he does, and we work closely with his group to deliver the products that he delivers, that we deliver, so that everything works together. So, as I said, I'm the traffic services engineer. That means I manage the traffic unit that is in the traffic roadway section. And I was told that maybe you need some distinction between traffic and roadway. And I was just telling Carol Cartwright that if roadway is the cake, then traffic is the icing. And why I say that is without that icing, it wouldn't be much of a cake, right? So when you're thinking about traffic, think about all those lines and all those signs and the signals that control it. If you just had a roadway out there or a bridge out there and didn't have any stripes on it or anything, it'd be kind of hard for the motorists to know where to go. So that's kind of how I differentiate between the two. With that said, all kidding aside, without us working closely with roadway, we wouldn't have a good product because we'd either be trying to fix something or the motorists would be running off the road because we're not doing what roadway intended to happen. So we've got to work closely together on that. So here's a list of all the sub-disciplines in traffic, and it's an extensive list. If you think about it, traffic is made up of a lot of little sub-disciplines. So signal signs, pavement markings, the work zones that we do, the safety projects we do speed zoning. Did you know we did speed zoning? ODOT does speed zoning for all roads in Oregon, not just state highways, but city streets, county roads, state highways. We also have our own traffic structures person that does like the cantilevers and the sign structures and those structures that hold up the VMS signs. We also do illumination, roadway illumination. We do something called investigations, which is kind of a mystery. It's more, what should we do out there? So when we have a complaint that they're not stopping at the stop sign and something's wrong here at this intersection, we'll do an investigation. Well, region traffic will do an investigation. So we're in the headquarters, and I'll get into it a little bit, but region traffic is really responsible, feet on the ground, and our role is more telling region best practices. They already know that, but they help us write down the best practices so that everybody can be doing the same best practices. So if you've memorized that list, you'll see over here too that I've got ITS that we work with. We work with planning a lot. We work with traffic signal services that you've heard about. Transportation safety. When you think about safety, you can kind of divide it up in your mind. There's employee safety that tells you how to be safe on the roads. And then there's this behavioral safety component that educates the public about how they should drive. And then there's the engineering safety, and that's what traffic unit does. It's like going out and doing projects to improve an intersection or that type of thing. So I want to kind of explain the different types of safety. When I say safety, in this presentation, I'm talking about the engineering safety. We work closely with maintenance because a lot of times they're the ones that get the complaint, but they're really our customer because they're the ones in charge of the road, so we kind of work closely with them on what we can do out there. And then transportation data, we use a lot of data in traffic. The traffic counts, the number of crashes, the TransGIS that has all those layers of data that you can see where everything is. That's a pretty sophisticated system. And Oregon's one of the states that has a comprehensive crash data system. Some states, you can't get to their crash data because the state police have their own system, the cities, the counties, they all have their own system. We're very fortunate in Oregon to have one system that we can look at all the crashes. And then Rail Division. We work closely with Rail Division because you could think of a rail line as its own jurisdiction, its own roadway. So when you come up to a rail line going across and you've got a highway going across it, they take precedence. Why? Because that rail's hard to stop, right? So only to say that they're their own jurisdiction. You got to work closely with the rail to make everything work on the highway. And they do take precedence over our highway traffic. So when they shut down those gates, that means don't go. But you all know that as drivers. So put the racetrack up here. I think this is interesting. We're getting a little bit of feedback. Is that right? Okay, sorry. We're involved in all components of the project delivery, but that little blue component up there, number 4, that is maintenance and operations. And that's, you go around a project delivery racetrack and you're delivering this project, and then you probably won't be back to that area again for another 10 years. Hopefully you're not back to that area for another 10 years or so. And then that little component of operations, that's a 10-year window where traffic plays a lot in that window, because that's a heavy part of what we do. Because we can't go back there and fix everything that may come up. More traffic may be out there, or a Costco may go in, or a Walmart may go in. So you may have some developments that go in. And traffic has to play in that area because we have to put in more signals or more signing or add some striping to guide the traffic. So I only say that because it's not all about project development, because a large component of where traffic plays is in this operations realm. So what Galen was showing you was kind of that operations realm. So what is the difference between technical services role and the region role? Well, technical services develops all the standards and guidance. We also give training for all the sub-disciplines. There's usually a training module with that. Maybe you've seen some of the pavement marking classes come out or the sign classes come out. Even if you don't, that's not what you normally do, it's good to take those classes so you're familiar with the limitations that they have. Also, we process all the approvals that come into Mike's position. That's for the state traffic engineer. So if you want a signal on the state highway, we have to get approval. We have to write up the justification for putting that out there. And then it has to go through Mike's office to get that approval to put the signal in there. So when I'm talking about state traffic approvals, that's what that is. There's also some approvals that are handled at region. And like for instance, Angela Cargill sitting in the back of the room for Region 2 traffic. She will approve some of those same types of devices. We have a whole list in our traffic manual of devices and who approves what. And so you can look further into that, or I suggest you just go ask Angela's crew what you should be doing to add a sign here or striping here or a signal. And I'll get more into that too. But the region traffic does all the investigations and looking at the different alternatives and kind of makes a recommendation to the state traffic engineer. That's their role in what we do. And also they develop most of the project development. They develop most of the plans and specifications that go into the projects. And I say most because there's a few places where our section will get involved with that and actually do some of the development with region's permission. We'll step in and do some of that too. So what tools do we have? We have the MUTCD, the Manual and Uniform Traffic Control Devices. Some people call it the MUTCD. I'd never said that very much. I just call it the MUTCD. It tells you everything about different devices like signing, striping, what you have to have. Every state uses this manual, and it's the Bible as far as we go for traffic engineering, because you have to have, every place you go, you have to have red stop signs, and they have to be octagonal. Is that how you say it? So that every driver, whether they're driving in Maine, Michigan, or Oregon, recognizes all those traffic control devices. So it's very important that we follow the MUTCD and don't deviate too far from it. We can experiment a little bit. Maybe you've seen some of the bike boxes that City of Portland uses. That's not in the MUTCD, but they ask for permission from the federal highways to experiment with that. There's a process that you go through when you want to experiment with things. You think it's going to improve operations or safety, you can go through the process and ask for those permission. The other manual that's high on my list is the traffic manual. It's kind of the umbrella manual over all these manuals that are along the bottom. It'll kind of, if you go to it and you have a specific question about signing at a right turn lane, sometimes it'll give you specific direction to go to this other manual. Or it'll give you some guidance in there. So that's always my first stop. And in fact, I've had a big hand in writing that over the years. And I still have to go back to it because I forget exactly what's in it. So if somebody asks me a question like, how do we do this? How do we name a highway? I go look in the traffic manual because I don't want to say wrong how we do that. But those are some of the questions. Like this morning, we got a question. Can we just name this street whatever we want right here, even though it's a connection to a state highway and ODOT owns it? Can the county come in and name it whatever they want? I don't know. But I sent that on to the district because I figured that the districts have dealt with that. And it is, I always remember that it's the district's responsibility. They own that. That's kind of been ground into me at ODOT. It's the district owns that piece of road. So they're the ones responsible for it. So I wouldn't try to do anything from the headquarters function that would override what the district wants to do. But I would leave that to Angela to work it out with the district. So you see all these other manuals underneath here? I was surprised there were 30-some manuals in traffic. That's a lot of manuals. But a lot of them are, you've got a guidance and practice manual for signing, you've got a design manual for striping, and maybe some other manual. And so you may have one for guidance and practices and one for design. And for every one of those disciplines that were listed, that's at least 20. So there's another 10 or so. Like we have one for red light running guide. Is anyone familiar with red light running cameras? We have one for fixed photo radar. City of Portland has fixed photo radar, so they can give you a traffic citation for speeding along these corridors. If you haven't encountered those yet, I haven't encountered them yet. But we have some guidance up there for those. And we have guidance of how we put them on our state highways. So there's a lot of knowledge in these manuals. Deviations from policy. So you may be familiar with roadway design exception process. How we process deviations from policy is we do that through the state traffic engineer approval for letters. We'll write down our investigation, our recommendation, and why we think that's the best thing to do. And then Mike will read that, and if he supports that, he'll sign that and approve it. That's how we document our deviations from policy. But we never take a deviation from a shall in the manual uniform traffic control devices, and we very rarely take a deviation from a should. Basically, it's you should not vary from shoulds in MUTCD. So unless you have a very good reason, there have been very good reasons. So there's also mays, which are options. Sometimes there's not really good guidance in the MUTCD. I mean, it'll say you should do this and you shall do this, but you may do this, but it doesn't tell you when you may or should consider doing something else. It has some of that in there, but it doesn't do that guidance part a whole lot. And that's what all the other manuals that I was showing you on the last slide, that's what all these manuals kind of tell you to do. Is kind of win this, try this. And so there's a lot of guidance in there. So if you need to know any of that, you can go trying to look for it, or you can just go ask region traffic. So request for approval. So here's a small list of things that come into Mike. Signals is one of them. Crosswalks, marked crosswalks, dual turns, turn prohibitions. Over the years, we've tried to make up good guidance for when we put a traffic control device in and when we avoid putting it in. And if we have good guidance on a traffic control device, then we say, okay, there's good guidance. The region traffic can decide on this one. And so we'll give that authority to the region traffic to decide, when you're going to when you're going to modify a signal to allow a right turn overlap, let's say. So we have good guidance on that. We will turn it over to the region. If it's more of a matter of a lot of judgment and region sometimes gets pressured, like to put in a signal, a place where it isn't warranted, we keep the signals in headquarters for that reason, that we don't get an additional signal on the system that may be a burden on traffic or delay traffic. If you think about it, signals really, what do? They control the right-of-way of the traffic, but they also delay the traffic. So we don't want to put one in if we don't really need one for safety. And this is just what I was saying, that region traffic will know which traffic control devices need to be approved by state traffic engineer, which they can approve, and they'll know how to do the engineering study and document it. So you all heard about liability this morning, so that's one reason why traffic always documents what they're doing and how they're putting in signs and striping and why we're putting in a signal or why we're putting in a roundabout instead. That's the reason we document it, is for the liability. Quality control. So this is talking more about development of project plans. All the traffic plans are QC'd at the region. But the one thing that headquarters still requires an approval on and still requires a review on is traffic signal plans. So when you're doing a traffic signal, build some time into your plan development to send it down to headquarters to get their approval. And I think that's enough on that. Was there an ADA talk this morning or later today? Well, that's good. I don't know anything about ADA, so. Or I know very little. I know to go ask, when to ask questions about it. So that's what most people need to know is when to ask. And crosswalks and crosswalk closures involved ADA, so be careful with that. Safety program. Okay, this one I know a lot about because I've been intimately involved in the safety program at ODOT for a lot of years. One thing to know about safety, I've already told you this is talking about the engineering component of it. One thing to know about safety is we're interested in the serious and fatal injuries. We aren't really interested in PDOs, property damage only, those fender benders by the side of the road. So if we can reduce fatal and serious injuries, that's our main goal. So if we're spending money on safety, your goal should be to spend it where there's fatal and serious injuries going on or where the risk is high of fatal or serious injuries, because you don't want to spend money on solving fender benders. You really want to spend the money in those areas where you're going to impact lives or reduce injury-causing crashes that incapacitate people for a lifetime. So, and we have a lot of them. We had been going down in fatal crashes every year. So we were down to, I think the lowest number we got to per year was like 317. And that's still a lot. That's like one a day. But now we're up over 400 again. It's been going up. The trend nationally has been going up. So we aren't the only state that are going up. But a lot of people say, well, what is the trend and why is that happening? A lot of people look at distracted driving and cell phone use and those kinds of things as one of the major players in that. Also, when your economy goes up, you have more serious and fatal injuries too. People are driving more, they're buying more cars, that kind of thing. Our safety program also focuses on all public roads, so we don't distinguish between just state highways. We do a competitive program where we we don't care whether it's a city street, state highway, county road. We want to get the most reduction in fatal and serious injuries we can. We split the dollars in between what we call hotspot and systemic. Hotspot is what you'd think it was. It's a spot where there's a lot of crashes, there's a high incident of crashes. Systemic is more, I call it the peanut butter approach. So like rumble strips. If you take rumble strips and spread it out over miles and miles and miles, you'll actually get a very good reduction in fatal and serious injuries from that, because in our state we have a lot of rural miles and we have a lot of cars running off the road. So, and one thing to know is we have ODOT has an approved list of countermeasures. So if you ever want to see what's on our safety list and what can be put in on a project, you could look at our countermeasures and you could see how much does that reduce? How much does putting a guardrail down the middle of I-5 reduce the crashes or expected to reduce the crashes? So as you've probably seen over the last couple of years, we put in all this cable barrier down the center of the interstates and closed off many of the interstates and many of the roads that are separated like freeways. Speed zones, I've already discussed this. We do all speed zones for the entire state. The important thing to take here from is if you have a project where you want to reduce speed zone, ask us early. We can give you a letter of support for that speed zone. And then when you need it, when your project's underway, the project manager can say, here's my letter of support. Can you give me the reduced speed from 55 to 50 or 65 to 60 or whatever it is. Safety Priority Index System, SPIS. This is a term you'll hear around ODOT. It's really that hotspot identifier. It's going to tell you where those hotspots are. So you can look, if you're doing a project, you can look on the SPIS list and say, do I have any SPIS sites on my list? Is there any places in my project where there's a high incidence of crashes? It doesn't mean that that location is going to be a good location to try to fix. It just means that you should be looking at it and see if you can reduce the crashes there. And our region traffic offices, we produce a SPIS list every year. A region traffic office goes out, looks at that list, and reviews the top 5% SPIS sites. And they actually come up with what they would propose or recommend for solutions. So that's a good place to go, is go to your region traffic and say, listen, I noticed there's some top 5 SPIS sites on my project. When you looked at them, what did you come up with for solutions on those? They may or may not work with the scope of your project, but it's good to look at. And good to document that you looked at it, considered it, even if you're not going to do it. I've already kind of gone over the MUTCD. It is the national standard. We do have a committee called the Oregon Traffic Control Devices Committee, OTCDC. We like acronyms. It's an advisory body. It has cities, counties, consultants in it. And so when we're considering making something a standard, we go to that group, we pass it by that group. Mike can overrule that group, but usually we get a good consensus in some of the concerns, and we can put out our guidance in such a way that all cities and counties can follow our guidance. So we do that. They're also, the thing to know is when you're developing standards here in Oregon, the cities and counties are often held to our standard, even if they've got other standards, because a litigator will come in and say, well, why aren't you following ODOT standards? That's best practices when they're litigating a case. So it's important to know that they're held to a higher standard. What I want to leave you with is that if you have a question about traffic, go see your region traffic people early. They know what needs to be done and documented. They know how you get that blinky light out there for the crosswalks. Or if you've got, as my wife says, clumpy traffic, what can you do about those kinds of things? So they know all that, and they work with that. And I'd suggest you can contact me if you don't know who to contact, or Kevin Haas. He manages the other traffic unit, or will shortly be manager of the other traffic unit. I have 30 people under my management, and right now, Kevin is going to be the manager of the standards unit, and I'll be the manager of the safety investigations unit. So, but either one of us would know who you should talk to, or if you should talk to your region traffic about it. Any questions? Left you speechless.
Any questions for Doug? There's one right here, and I'm going to grab the microphone.
Thank you. All right, well, going back to ADA.
Yeah.
So ADA improvements is obviously a big part of all of the projects going out right now. And one of the things I've been encountering is, what is ODOT's like, does ODOT has any guidance as far as when they want to do actual like painted crosswalks at unsignalized locations?
Yes.
All the literature I've seen, just for visibility purposes, kind of suggests that, but I've kind of ran into some pushback saying like it gives the pedestrian like more confidence in crossing the roadway, and that might lead to an accident. So I'm just wondering where ODOT is on that kind of balance.
Well, so marking crosswalks is a tricky business. We want to mark crosswalks where they're safe to mark them, where the pedestrian would be safe to use them. Or if we're not sure they're going to be safe, then we want to give one of the rapid flash beacons, the blinky things. So in that case, if you have a project that's going through an urban area, or even if it's not urban, but you think that there might be some crossing activity and you might want to look at marking a crosswalk, that's when you talk to your region traffic folks. They can look at an urban section and say, let's say you already have a couple marked crosswalks and you want to mark a couple more, or you think that a couple more might be good. Engage your region traffic, because they may want to take away the one marked crosswalk and move it to the location where it's more appropriate. Because there are safer locations sometimes than others. And they're used to looking at it. But you can look in the traffic manual. So it'll have a whole article on crosswalks, when they're good, when they're bad, when they're ugly.
Well, I guess what I'm encountering is I haven't seen anything like in the manuals or any guidance saying, that you wouldn't install a marked crossing. Because one of the big things on the 8A thing is providing dual curb ramps for each traveling direction. So if you don't have a crosswalk closure, I haven't seen anything why you wouldn't want that crossing to be marked.
Well, you wouldn't want it to be marked where it wasn't safe. You may actually want to close it where it isn't safe.
That's actually what I was just saying. If it isn't safe, then there would be a sidewalk, crossing closure.
I might answer this by saying, we've all been in those cities where they marked every block. It kind of takes away from markings that are important. You don't know which markings are important, and it kind of blends into the background. And as a driver, you think, okay, they just marked them all. I don't see anybody at any of them, so I'm not going to pay attention to them. So that's kind of the thinking behind why we're selective in marking them. So we are selective. It doesn't say when you don't mark them, because we've got a lot of guidance of when you do mark them. Does that help?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I guess what I'm getting at is I feel like it's a little bit conflicting, where it's like, I could think, you kind of mentioned before, where if it don't mark, if it's not safe, but then it's safe enough to put a curb ramp there, but not safe enough to put a visibility indicator that there's a crosswalk there. So it's just that little muddy water type.
Yeah, there's a lot of engineering judgment that goes into whether you mark or not. So I would still go back to go to your region traffic, discuss it with them, get their input on why they wouldn't mark it here. But I would be selective about how you mark them, because if you have it marked every block, it kind of defeats the purpose of calling it out. The reason to call it out and mark it is to say to a driver, watch out here, there might be pedestrians crossing. So you want to kind of selectively mark them where you think the pedestrians are going to be crossing. But you know pedestrians as well as I do. they'll cross anywhere.
So Doug, let me add a little bit to that.
Sure.
Since part of this question was around ADA. So let's sort of clarify something. Everybody has the right to access the roadway equally. You can step off the curb because you're very mobile. Someone else might not be able to do that. At any intersection of two roadways in the state, there's a legal crossing. Now, there's a caveat to that. If we mark one of them, the other one's not a legal crossing. We have to mark them both. So everywhere we go where we have a legal crossing, we need to give equal access to everyone. You can choose to cross that location, whether it's marked or not, because there's a legal crossing there regardless. So should someone else be able to make that choice if they're in a wheelchair or using a walker or some other reason that they aren't fully mobile and being able to step off of a curb. And so the law says when we produce a new facility, we need to give everybody equal access. So that's the ADA part of what you're talking about. The safety part is we need to evaluate whether or not that location is a really good place for a marked crossing, because people take different actions when something is designated as a location. And we have a very good set of criteria that gives us an idea about how people react when there's a marked crossing and whether or not it's an enhancement to safety to mark it or to leave it the way it is. And that's the evaluations that we go through. So two different pieces that kind of blend together. Does that help?
Good question, though. I like the question. Makes me think that you're thinking about things. And pedestrians and bicyclists and marking for active users and vulnerable users is one of the places with the hardest to deal with and try to figure out what's the right thing to do.
Hey, we have time for one more question. Right here, Teresa.
That was a perfect lead into my question. So what is the best way to engage with your active transportation liaison or regional transit coordinator to tackle some of these tough questions? When in the process and how?
When in the process, I think early and often in the process, if you're doing a project and you know that there's vulnerable users or users that are going to want to use the system, or maybe it's an urban area. That's a perfect segue into, we're doing this urban design initiative that's going to help us decide the frequency of crossings and what types of bikeways to use. But it also addresses your question of how do you engage the active transportation liaisons in each region. And if you don't know what those are, we haven't had active transportation liaisons in regions. And they're, if I could simplify it, they're the pedestrian and bicycle. They're more than that, but they're the pedestrian bicycle advocates. And in our urban areas, we do have that, and the community wants to have a more active transportation system, a system that's safer for active users to use. And so the Urban Design Initiative is really addressing some of that, and also addressing who do you involve and how do you involve them. So I'll defer to that. That's coming out very soon. Did I answer your question, or? Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Doug. Really appreciate it. Let's give him a hand.